Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Fitness for Myeloma event tonight. We're super excited to have each of you here and appreciate you spending this virtual time with us. We are going to share a few slides to begin, just by way of announcement. So let's head back to this screen. Hope everyone's having a good night or afternoon, depending on where you are. It might be even morning, because I know we have some people across the ocean that join us, which is so exciting. So, Lindley, can you just confirm that you can see the slides? I always get nervous that
Yes.
maybe we can't see the slides. Awesome. All right, so like I said, welcome to our Fitness for Myeloma chapter. And today we are going to hear from Jim and Kathleen Bond. I'm so excited to hear from them. They're such good people. I haven't even met them in person, but you can just feel over the virtual calls we've had just their souls and such amazing examples too. So I'm really excited for you to hear about their experiences and Jim's stem cell transplant experiences. We'd like to thank our community sponsors, Bristol Myers Squibb, Amgen Oncology, Karyopharm Therapeutics, AbbVie Adaptive Biotechnologies, Genentech Oncopeptides, and Takeda Oncology. I'd also like to introduce our featured speakers today. We have Lindley Sweeney. She is going to be moderating the Q&A today after the Bonds give their presentation. She joined the myeloma crowd in January 2020 to share her passion for health. Her husband is a cancer survivor as well as a cancer biologist. Finding a cure, better treatments, and balancing life through treatment, is a huge passion of their family. She's a mom of an energetic 4-year-old, a marathon runner, and an Ironman finisher, which is awesome. Fitness has been a huge part of her life, and she loves to share it with others. We also have, as I said, Jim and Kathleen Bond here. They celebrated their 50th anniversary last year, and they live in the greater Cleveland area of Cleveland, Ohio. They have 2 grown sons and 3 grandchildren. Jim is a retired Ernst & Young partner, and Kathleen is a retired American Cancer Society National Board member. She is also an active volunteer leader and caretaker for Jim's multiple myeloma and leukemia cancers. Jim and Kathleen advocate for cancer patients and have shared their survival story throughout the United States and internationally. Just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and will be sent out to all registrants 24 to 48 hours after this event's completion. That email will include the recording and the slides that I share with you today. And with that, I know sometimes our system's weird, so Jim, I'm asking you to start the video, and hopefully you see that message pop up and you're able to start your video. It looks like yes, awesome. So let's have you unmute as well, and then we're so excited to turn the time over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Audrey. Appreciate your kind words and really appreciate the myeloma crowd and Health Tree inviting us to be here. It's a great honor for us to speak to this group. When I was diagnosed, it was a shot out of lightning out of nowhere. I was healthy in my early 40s. Kids were off to college, and we were thinking, we were going to be empty nesters and do some of the things we wanted to do. And I'd never heard of this disease. When the doctor who diagnosed me told me it was incurable, I asked him, "How long do you think I'll live?" And he said, "If you do nothing, you'll live a matter of months. And if you do everything you can do, you'll live as many as 3 years if everything goes right." And we were stunned. But I managed to ask one other question. I said, "If you were in my shoes, doctor, what doctor would you have treat my disease?" And he responded, to my surprise, he responded, "Jim, I'd go across the street. We've got another major cancer center in our town here. It's called University Hospitals. And their oncologist sees more myeloma patients than I do. And he said, that's what I'd do if I were you. And he then said, can I help you make an appointment with him? Well, I was really touched by his compassion and kindness. And I got my first view of the kind of compassion and skill that myeloma doctors that we've dealt with have used. It was a real positive to a real negative situation. Before we left his office, I said, what would you do if you were me? He said, I might retire, Jim. He said, I might do my bucket list while I had a chance. So we went home that weekend and I thought hard about retiring. But we really had no bucket list. I enjoyed my work. And I thought back on my own life, and I realized I had another setback physically that I thought was really earth-shaking at the time. I shattered a leg playing baseball. And that ended my dreams of playing ball beyond the high school level. But as I look back on it, I realized, hey, a lot of good things happened because of that setback. And I thought to myself, why can't we do the same with this incurable, deadly multiple myeloma? Why can't we treat it as a challenge and see how far we can get? In other words, let's give it our best shot, which we did. And we got comfortable with the doctor that was recommended. He was a veteran. He was somebody that we could relate to, and we liked him. And I got through my first 10 years of myeloma with his leadership and his help. And I had 3 stem cell transplants of my own cells. And it was not planned out that way. It's just the way it worked out. And we had to leave town for a second opinion at the Mayo Clinic twice to get approval by our doctor, our transplant doctor, to do the second and third transplants. But that proved to be very valuable too. So after my third transplant, which is at the end of my 10th year of dealing with myeloma, and oh, by the way, I was at the stage 3, the last stage they have for myeloma when I was diagnosed. I had a lot of involvement, bone involvement, kidneys were damaged, typical stuff. So at the end of 10 years, I had just gotten my third transplant, which was actually not from my own cells, it was from my sister, my matching sister, Becky, whose cells matched mine. And her cells, the transplant worked, it worked fine. But what was not fine was my myeloma level was way too high for her cells to drive down the high level of myeloma. In fact, it was out of control, to the point that my transplant doctor said, Jim, we're gonna have to send you to a hospice because there's nothing more we can do to keep you alive. And I guess I forgot to tell you, this diagnosis was 29 years ago. So if you go back 29 years, the drugs we have today were not out yet. We had melphalan and prednisone, that's about it. Some other scary stuff that affect the whole body, not targeting myeloma like today. So he said, you have to go to a hospice. And I said, no, wait a minute. I said, in our out of town second opinion, we learned about a clinical trial that was showing really good results for really sick patients like me. And I named the study, and he said, oh, yeah. He said, I know all about that. He said, you're wasting your time to even try. There are no openings for that study anywhere in the United States or anywhere else. And I said, well, I'm going to try. And he didn't like that. He got frustrated and turned his back and walked out of the room on us. So I went back to my office. I was then a practicing CPA and placed a phone call and asked my doctor at the Mayo Clinic if he could recommend some hospitals I could try. And he gave me a list and I called them. And I sat there waiting for one of them to call back. Actually, I was praying for one of them to call back because I was pretty bad shape. And one Friday afternoon, the phone rang, and a younger sounding British guy was on the other end of the phone saying, "Hello, Jim. Paul Richardson at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute here. I know a little bit about your story. We have an opening. I only have 2 questions for you." And I thought, man, these must be tough questions. He's only got 2 of them. And of course, as an accountant, I had a lot of detail in front of me of my 10-year history, thinking he might ask me something medically that I'd need to recall. He said, question number 1, how soon can you get here? And I said, we can get there tomorrow. And he said, well, tomorrow's Saturday. I said, yeah. He said, oh, Monday'd be fine. I said, okay, we'll be there Monday. He said, second question. I thought, oh boy, here it comes. He said, are you willing to relocate from Cleveland, Ohio, to Boston, Massachusetts, and live here for 9 months, the duration of the trial? Well, I could not say yes quickly enough. I thought, here's a guy talking 9 months when I'd just been told my days were over, go to a hospice. So I went home and I started packing for 9 months. But I thought it was strange that my wife, Kathleen, was seemingly packing for a weekend. She wasn't throwing much gear in her suitcase, but I was not feeling well and I just shrugged it off. But then when my sister and brother-in-law dropped me off at the airport, my younger sister, Denise gave me a hug goodbye. And it was pretty clear she was saying goodbye, not for 9 months, but she was saying goodbye to her brother. But again, I kind of shrugged it off and was not feeling well. And we got to Boston. And after a hurdle or two, I got into the clinical trial. And this is probably the most amazing part of our story. Within 2 weeks, which would be 4 shots, 4 injections, IVs of this experimental drug, 99% of my high level of abnormal protein went into remission. And they had not seen anything like that before. And they were going wild. And the study nurse told me, now we have to confirm this with your next reading, but this is really unbelievable. And the next reading did confirm it. And I did go into complete remission in a month or 2. And by the completion of the trial, I was back up and running as normal. And so grateful for this drug, which is now called Velcade, which I know you've heard of if you're getting into the myeloma world. And I got to thinking how fortunate we were that we could pull up stakes and relocate at the drop of a hat. And what about people that don't have the resources to enable them to do that? And that's where Kathleen, who started out her American Cancer Society volunteer career, going door to door to get a few bucks for the cause, she worked her way up in that as a volunteer in that organization. She reminded me that's why the American Cancer Society owns and operates over 30 Hope Lodges around the country, so that patients and a caregiver can stay for free while they're being treated for something that they maybe couldn't get at home, which is my situation. I said, well, Kathleen, why don't I know about that? I mean, we live together. I should know these things. She said, well, we don't advertise. But she came up with this idea following that conversation. She said, Jim, I've got a way to raise awareness and money for the American Cancer Society Hope Lodges. I said, honey, what's your idea? She said that she would create and lead a bike ride, 4 days, 328 miles from our city, Cleveland, down to the southern end of our state, Cincinnati. And she would have riders raise money and raise awareness to Hope Lodges. And I said, Kathleen, that's a great idea, except neither one of us cycle, neither one of us own a bicycle. She said, this is Kathleen. She said, not to worry, she'll overcome that. And she did, with the help of the American Cancer Society and a co-leader who really was a cyclist. They put it together, and I watched her work so hard for 2 or 3 years to get this thing ready to go that I was starting to feel guilty. So I went out and bought a bike. And I got advice on how to train, what to do, how to not kill myself. And I decided I was going to ride. Did the training, and I'm ready to go. But before our first ride, this would be the year 2007, we were at another myeloma fundraising event, and in our city, and a TV reporter who knew our story a little bit, came up to our younger son, Bob, who was there, and said, Bob, do you think your dad will really be able to cycle 4 days, 328 miles when he's really not a cyclist and he's got a few issues from myeloma? And I got home that night and turned on the TV to hear Bob's answer, which was, said, well, I don't know if my dad will make it all the way or not, but I will tell you this about my father. When Dad says he's going to do something, he'll do it. Of course, I'm hugely touched by that and still am, but I'm feeling a lot of pressure. Like, no, I got to do more than just show up. I better really put in a good effort here after hearing that from Bob. So I got on my bike with the other riders, and I made it all 4 days, all 328 miles, with the help of our other son, Jim, who is a cyclist, and our daughter-in-law, Stacy, who cycled, and they both looked out for me and make sure I stayed on the straight and narrow. And I did the same thing, riding all 4 days, 300 plus miles, the next dozen years. And I'm very proud of that, because it not only speaks to raising money and helping other cancer patients, but it also speaks to one of the cornerstones of why I believe I'm alive today, and that is staying fit and doing daily exercise. Now, you may be thinking, well, this guy who calls himself James Bond, this guy says daily exercise. He just told us he's done 3 transplants. And yeah, when you're doing a transplant, there are times when you certainly can't do very much. You're really out from the procedures. So what I mean by exercise every day is I push myself to do what I can that day. And there were days when the most I could do in the transplant floor was make myself sit up in bed as long as I could. And then I'd make myself get out of bed, holding on for dear life, as long as I could. And then I'd grab the IV pole in a few days and start walking around the floor section. So, and as one of the pictures that's being shown, they got tired of me walking around their floor sections all the time. And they brought a treadmill for me to walk on because they knew I was going to be doing it. So I really believe that exercise, in whatever form we're capable of safely doing is really one of the things that's been really crucial to me staying alive. My daughter-in-law heard me say this, or my sister-in-law heard me say this, and she said, Jim, what you're really saying is get on your feet and get off your seat. And I said, yeah, Marianne, that's really what I'm saying. So things are going along pretty good. We got invited to do some of these talks around the country, even around the world, and we're happy to do that. Not to bring attention to ourselves, but to give some people the kind of hope that we need. We needed when we were first diagnosed. As Jenny Alston said in the introduction, it's very lonely when you're first diagnosed because there's nowhere really to go to find your case. And we've learned that each case is kind of unique anyhow. So as troubling as it is, with no cure out there, it's frustrating. So we're doing these talks, and my nurse here in Cleveland said, Jim, before you get in the plane for your next talk, stop by. I want to draw your blood. Something doesn't seem right about you. So she did. And when Lee walked back with the results, staring down at the piece of paper, I didn't need to look at the numbers. I could see her face. She said, Jim, you got something really bad. Your platelets have dropped to a terribly low level. And you need to do another bone marrow biopsy right now so we can see what's going on. And I said, Lee, you know that I've done over 30 bone marrow biopsies so far. And are you sure I need to do this? And she says, yeah, Jim, we're sure. So I did. Phone rang at home. A couple of days later, it was the transplant doctor. He said, Jim, we looked at your bone marrow biopsy. Unfortunately, you have leukemia. And it's worse than that. You have treatment-related leukemia, which means the only way we can keep you alive is for you to withstand a fourth transplant. And this one cannot be from your matching sister. That won't work because your bone marrow thinks you are your sister. So he said it's going to be very hard. I was 64 at the time. He explained that my bone marrow had been compromised from the other treatments. And he cautioned me, he said, you may not want to do this. He said, we don't know if we can find a match. We haven't started to look yet. You may want to talk this over with your wife and see if you're willing to do it. And I said, no need. She's listening. I said, I'll be down in the morning. We'll get started. And that happened to be a wedding anniversary night. So I hung up the phone. We went out and tried to celebrate as much as we could, knowing that we had another mountain to climb. So I got in the transplant floor, and I noticed the nurses and the rounding doctors were not very optimistic about my chances. In fact, they seemed to be lowering my expectations of success. So I kept trying to talk them up, saying, we can do this, we'll get through this. But I want to tell you, that transplant for leukemia was very, very difficult. I was in the hospital 75 straight days, and it was brutal. It was probably harder than the other three combined. At a really low point during that experience, I got a phone call in my room one night. It was the same doctor, Paul Richardson from the Dana-Farber in Boston. He said, Jim, I'm going to tell you what I just told your wife. I just hung up with her. We've had other patients with myeloma that developed treatment-related leukemia, got a transplant, and they survived. He said, so will you. Well, that meant a lot to me. It really gave me a shot in the arm I needed. And I really appreciate that. That's the kind of compassion we have in the world, that that we've been fortunate enough to run into. So more good news. My local transplant doctor came in and said, Jim, we found a match for you, and we've lowered your leukemia level to where you're eligible for a transplant. And I said, great, when can we do it? And he said, well, that's the problem. He said, we've got a group of transplant doctors here, and they all have to believe that your chances of living through another transplant are reasonable. And right now, 2 of them are voting against you. And I said, well, Doc, you already told me if I don't get this transplant, I'm going to die. He said, that's right. And I said, well, can't you just give it a try? And he said, no, we're not allowed to just give it a try. We can't be the ones to kill you. So I was pretty depressed. He came back the next, and I said, before he left, I said, Doc, will you do me one favor? Will you explain to the other doctors voting against me that I rode my bicycle over 300 miles in 4 days, less than 2 months ago, in the ride's called the Pan Ohio Hope Ride? Just explain that to them, please. And he did. He came back the next day and said, Jim, it worked. When the other doctors heard that you had that kind of strength and stamina, they changed their vote from no to yes. So we're going to go ahead and do the transplant. So on Halloween, I got the stem cells from the unrelated donor that was found on the donor matching database. And by Christmas, I was discharged and pronounced in remission on both cancers. The myeloma had stayed in remission the whole time, but now the leukemia joined it in remission. So I can't say enough for the people at the bone marrow transplant organization. And also a tip for those of us who have friends saying to us, well, look, what can I do to help with your cancer? My answer has been, if you've got a friend or relative 18 to 44 years old, ask them to go to the website called Be the Match, Be the Match. And they can ask for it and get a free little envelope with a Q-tip in it, rub the inside of their jaw and mail it back in, and they're in the database, because it was life-saving in my case. After a couple of years went by, I learned that my donor lived in Germany, and she was another woman, which kind of made sense to me, because ever since that transplant, I've had an overwhelming urge to go to Oktoberfest. Now, I've always liked sauerkraut, but that explains that. So people have asked me, Jim, is it hard to ride your bike as a non-cyclist 4 days, over 300 miles? And I tell them, yeah, it is. But it's not as hard as dealing with myeloma. That's much harder. And I really mean that. So it's not all been good news. I do have noticeable side effects from the disease, the treatments. I'm a couple inches shorter. My back is twisted and curved. I've got metal, replaced one hip and one bone on the other arm. One shoulder doesn't work very well. When my particular myeloma was active, it really did damage the bones. And I realize that's not true of everybody's, but it was true of mine. I had a plasmacytoma pop up on the back of my skull after about, 15 or so years with the disease, first time ever. In fact, the doctors thought it was just a cyst until they tried to remove it. They realized it was a plasmacytoma. And that really led to a discussion that's worth sharing with you. When my myeloma expert at Dana-Farber, Paul Richardson, when I told him about that, he said, Jim, I recommend we add a second drug to the maintenance drug you're now taking. He wanted to add Velcade to it. And I said, Paul, before you do that, I'd feel better if we keep Velcade in reserve, or if I really get in trouble, because that really worked well when I was in really big trouble back a while ago. And he just agreed with that. And with the help of his nurse, who got me alone and explained to me an approach to take, Paul and I were able to come to agreement that he would be okay with my increasing the dosage of the maintenance drug I was on and keeping the Velcade in reserve, because it would make me feel more comfortable. And I promised him that I'd do a couple of things he wanted me to do, and that I would let him know in a month how the protein level looked. And fortunately, the protein level went down with the increase in the other maintenance drug. And I was a little concerned that how he would react by going with an idea that he didn't recommend, but he agreed to go along with my idea. And when I talked to him on the phone about that, first thing out of his mouth was, Jim, good call, way to go. And again, an example of putting the patient out there is their first concern, and not worrying about their own egos. So my other side effects are, I've blown out a thyroid, gotten shingles a couple times. I've got one I'd like to tell you about. Kathleen spotted something on my skin, and I had it checked out, and it was a form of skin cancer. And when I was getting that spot removed, the doctor's dermatologist said, Jim, when you get a transplant, let alone 3 or 4, you're at high risk for more skin cancer. So we recommend you come in and see us every 4 months, and we'll inspect your skin to see if we find any other spots and catch them in time. And I've been doing that for several years, and every time I go in, they find something that my eyes hadn't detected. And that's something I didn't know about. I also found out when I had my hip replaced from the surgeon. He said, Jim, he said, long-term use of steroids make you at high risk for avascular necrosis of your hip bone, the ball and socket. I said, really? I said, they didn't really explain that to me. He said, well, Jim, they're trying to keep you alive, so they got to do what they got to do. I said, yeah, I understand. But ever since then, I have really thought long and hard about any recommendation to add a steroid to whatever drug might be proposed, and found that there is some flexibility if I advocate for myself and go with an approach of, well, look, if we try it my way, it doesn't work, we can always add the steroid later. It's not like I'm life threatened right now. If I were being life threatened, I might not react that way. In fact, I would not react that way. In fact, I think it's fair to say that with all the drugs that have come out for myeloma in the last, dozen years or so, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't go the path I went on to get to where I am today, but that's what we did and what we had to do. And it can be done. So what's our secret? What's our approach? Well, I think you've heard a lot of it. second opinions, clinical trials. I've been in 6 clinical trials so far, but not for the sake of being in a clinical trial, only when it aligned with what was best for me. Then I'm a firm believer, strong believer in a clinical trial. Certainly exercise, daily exercise, like I was saying. Find something to I keep myself moving around, even though at times it doesn't seem like much, but I know I'm pushing myself to do it. And I'll close before turning it over to Kathleen for some of her great remarks as caregiver. I'll close by what some people say to me when they hear some of this story. They say, Jim, you're just lucky. And I say, yeah, I'm very lucky. I agree with you. But I'm going to quote a famous collegiate golf instructor who instructed people like Ben Crenshaw when he was at the University of Texas. He tells golfers, when you're lining up a putt, a long putt across a hilly, undulating green, of course you're lucky if you sink that putt in one stroke. But here's the thing. You've got to hit that ball hard enough to get it at least to the hole and thereby give luck a chance to happen. And I believe that's what we've done. We've done all we could do to give luck a chance to happen. And I believe further that that's what each of you watching this live or watching it recorded, that's what you're doing. You're increasing your chances by increasing your knowledge of this insidious disease that has no cure, that we're all fighting against. And again, Audrey and Health Tree and Jenny Olson, I thank you very much for inviting us. And I'll turn it over to why I'm the real James Bond. That's a beautiful Bond girl of over 50 years, Kathleen.
Thank you, honey. I wish that were my age. Oh, it's really great to be with you all tonight, virtually, which has been pretty much our lives for the past year. We really don't leave the house much, except for
Flat tires.
the occasional flat tire, but and that was odd because we don't leave the house much. But anyway, we're very glad to be here, and I am truly humbled by what Jenny Ahlstrom has put together through her battle, and what she and Paul have accomplished is just absolutely amazing. And all that, and have 6 children at the same time. It's really impressive. I have 2 children, but we had the empty nest. Our kids were just, our youngest one had just gone off to school when Jim was diagnosed. And as you heard Jim say, we were completely in a state of shock. It was a cancer we had never heard of. Jim's family was still reeling from the death of his youngest sister, who had just died 3 months prior to Jim's diagnosis. And she had died from melanoma that tragically just ran through her, and she left behind a 3-month-old baby. So we were all just devastated. And then to hear that my husband at the age of 43 was diagnosed with an incurable blood cancer, it just rocked our world to the absolute core, as you all know, because you've heard that as well. But we, as Jim said, we talked and we decided we were going to get after it. And I know I decided that this cancer was going to do everything it could to take my husband, but it wasn't taking me with it, and with him rather. And I decided I was going to do everything I could to make sure I was in good shape. And that meant I continued to go to my exercise classes in the morning. I would go to my aerobics class and I would jump around all over the place like a maniac. People thought I was nuts, but I would visualize cancer cells like I was stomping on them, and I just let it all out. And it really helped me because I needed that outlet. And the other thing that I did when Jim was diagnosed, because we didn't have the benefit of the myeloma crowd and the amazing work that you're doing with Health Tree, I decided I was going to learn everything I could about myeloma. And I went to the library and there was precious little in there. So I went to the medical school library and I got myself a medical dictionary. And I sat down and looked up all these articles and read everything I could about it and learned all these terms. It was like learning a new language. And everything I read was not good. There was nothing hopeful. And I kept reading about these cases and none of them ended well. And I would read these and I would think, well, that's this person, that's not Jim. And I didn't realize then how right that was, because the same cancer, the same subtype of myeloma in two different people is two different cancers. Everybody is so individual. And I really came to appreciate that over these 29 years of dealing with this disease. But I didn't know that then, but I kept telling myself because I needed to hang on to hope. And that helped me a lot, just to have that attitude. Well, that's not what's going to happen to Jim. And Jim, went through a lot of rough spells that first year, but we got to where we were facing, his first transplant using his own cells. And back then it was still pretty experimental. And I remember thinking when Jim went into the hospital and they said, be prepared for 4 to 6 weeks of hospital time. I thought, well, I'm going to do everything I can to help Jim be the best patient he can be. And Jim was in that hospital and he was always getting out of bed, drove the nurses crazy because they couldn't find him half the time because he'd be down the hall. But he was always up walking. And I even brought in hand weights for him to sit at the edge of the bed or in a chair and do some hand weights just to keep his muscles going. And whenever he could, he was out of bed. And unless he was going to be sleeping, he was in bed. Now, that's not to say it was easy. There came a time, because he got total body radiation back then, 3 days of total body radiation twice a day. And I seriously thought he was going to glow in the dark. I was kind of nervous even sitting near him. But even through that, after that, he was on morphine and he was totally out of it. And I remember one Sunday I was sitting there and he didn't even realize I was in the room. He was so out of it. The next Sunday, we were sitting at our son's graduation, our oldest son's college graduation, 1 week later. And I never would have thought that was possible. But Jim sailed through that transplant. He was out of there after 2 weeks. And I really believe one of the things that really helped him was the fact that he kept moving when he could. He was up and moving. And as you heard him say earlier, he kind of developed the mantra of I think you said the sit, stand, walk. If you can sit, stand. If you can stand, walk. And if you can walk a little faster. And that's held him in good stead. And as my sister said, off your seat, on your feet. And I think about that too, because I need to be doing the same thing, especially since we've all been under quarantine for so long. One of the other things that I don't think Jim conveyed was when we had to leave town for that crucial clinical trial, how sick Jim really was. He was running fever of 104, 105. His legs were swelling up. It was clear to me his kidneys were starting to fail. It was a really scary time. We somehow got into the hotel in Boston, right next to Dana-Farber. I walked right over to the phone, called Dana-Farber and told them what was going on with Jim. And they said the doctor on call would call me back. Well, the doctor on call did call me right back. And the doctor on call was Dr. Ken Anderson. And Ken called me back, and we had never met at this point. He said, Mrs. Bond, here's what you need to do to get Jim through the night. If this, that, and this happens, you go right to the emergency room. But we really hope that we will see him at clinic tomorrow at 8 a.m. And he said, by the way, Mrs. Bond, did anybody tell you that your husband is the 7th patient admitted into our study? So his study number is 007. And Ken said, I have to believe that's good karma. And clearly it was, because here we are tonight talking with you. But I will never forget that Jim was patient 007. But one of the things that I think over time really helped me as well, it was focusing on what I could do. because it really felt like there was so much I couldn't do about this disease other than learn as much as I could. But I focused on what I could do. And that was learning what I could, helping Jim with a good diet, with a basic diet, nothing crazy, but a good, healthy diet. When he got home from the transplant and needed to get some exercise, we would walk around the neighborhood together. When he was a little weaker at different points during all his treatments, we would go and we would do what we used to call the nature tour. And we would walk around our backyard. And we couldn't go very far, but we would just walk around the backyard and talk about, what we'd see blooming and, just to be out. And it really was, we should probably do that now as spring approaches. But doing what we could was empowering, and controlling the things we could control made us feel better trying to get through all this. And it's very empowering, and it certainly empowered me to feel that I knew a lot about this disease and there was so much more to learn. And I know Jenny can run rings around me on the science of it, but it truly helped me during those early years. Now, some of the other strategies we developed over all this time have been really out of just self-preservation, but we developed a few. And one of them was, and we would get second opinions. And we early on realized that it was really important to talk to somebody who had seen myeloma a lot. You wanted to be with a doctor that sees it and deals with it all day, every day. And that's not always possible depending on where you live. But through my research in the library, we basically determined the top 5 authorities in this disease. And back in 1992, getting a fax was a big deal. So we faxed each one of them a letter, short letter, saying, here's the diagnosis, here's the situation. What would you do if you were me? All 5 of them got back to us, 2 of them the same day. And we were nobody. We had no connections. I was a door-to-door volunteer for the American Cancer Society back then. I had no connections. We were just 2 desperate people. All 5 of those docs we heard from, and we are in touch with almost all of them today, and they've become friends. And they all said, you're lucky you live where you live. Here's what we would do, and you can get it done there, but we'd be happy to see you. Well, we stayed here. Jim's had all his transplants done in Cleveland. We were very, very fortunate, though, to develop those relationships, because those came into play later whenever we needed to consult for second and sometimes third opinions. And they have been a valuable team for us as well, even now. But one of the things that we would always try to do when we gathered our opinions and we'd make the decision that felt right for us, we really had to look at what we were prepared to do. And that was, we wouldn't second guess ourselves. There was no point in second guessing after we had gathered the facts and talked to, the docs we needed to talk to and decided a course of action. We realized we move forward and we don't look back. And we hold that today. We will do the same thing when needed. The other strategy that has been really helpful for us, and this is a hard one, it's easy to say, but hard to do, is to stay in the middle emotionally. We were in this for the long haul, and we didn't know how long the haul was going to be, but here we are 29 years later. But we realized that when we got bad news, we couldn't let ourselves get so down in the dumps that we couldn't function and implement plans and talk to who we needed to talk to. We would pull ourselves up to the middle emotionally by saying, okay, this isn't good, but we know what's out there. We know who we need to talk to. We had always kept our eye on the horizon. So we would try to bring ourselves up to that middle position emotionally. And then we would implement a plan. And by the same token, to be fair, when we got good news, like, hey, Jim, you're in remission, and we didn't come out of there high-fiving. We came out of there talking about, okay, let's bring it down. We know there's no cure for this yet, but we wouldn't let ourselves get too giddy. And it really helped us level out the emotional roller coaster this whole thing can become. And to this day, we even try to stay in the middle on that. We also developed a rule that has been really helpful for a number of things, but especially going through all this. We have what we call our 8 p.m. rule. And at 8 p.m., no matter where we are, who we're talking with, and there's an exemption tonight, we are done with cancer. We don't talk about it. We don't deal with it. Jim could be in the hospital, hooked to 5 IVs. He'll say to me, well, it's 8 o'clock. Are you going to go home? Are you going to stay, watch a movie? What? And we are done. But we know we're going to get after it the next morning. By 8 the next morning, we're after it. And I have to tell you, in all honesty, it used to be a 9 p.m. rule, but we're that much older. So we go to bed earlier. So it makes for a short night. So we changed it to 8. And if it ever gets to 7, I'm not telling anybody. But that rule's helped us a lot. And I think one of the things that was probably the hardest for me after that initial horrible weekend after the diagnosis, I really had a hard time after Jim had his first transplant. As I said earlier, Jim sailed through that transplant. I think he set a record for anybody that had a transplant at our hospital. And I was just stunned. A month later, he was back at work. Things were normal. He wasn't taking any maintenance. There was nothing extraordinary going on. And I hit the wall. I couldn't take it. I was a nervous wreck. I was having trouble sleeping. I was, calling the doctor saying, shouldn't he be doing something? And the doctor said, no, let's let this ride. And I was a mess until one morning, Jim had left for work and he was gone maybe an hour and the phone rings. And I pick up the phone and it's Jim. And he says, honey, I'm okay, but your car isn't. And he proceeds to tell me that he was at a stoplight. The light turned green. He starts to go through the intersection. From out of nowhere comes a pink Buick, T-bones him on the driver's side, shoves him into another car. And I started screaming, what? How could you have an accident after all we've been through? And I was bonkers, absolutely bonkers. And I heard myself carrying on about this accident that certainly wasn't his fault. And thankfully, everybody was okay. The cars weren't, but everybody was okay. And I realized that I had lost it, that I better get a grip because you know what? While we're all worried about this cancer situation, from out of nowhere comes a pink Buick to try to take you out. So it got my head in a good place and helped me get real about, what we can appreciate each day and what we need to do to keep moving forward. But to this day, whenever I see a pink vehicle of any kind, it brings that back to me. But I also kind of focused on a quote that I picked up along the way that helps me tremendously when things get tough. And it's something I adapted from St. Francis of Assisi. And that is to look around at what's necessary and attempt to do that. Then look at what's possible to do and attempt to do that. And before you know it, you may look back and realize you've accomplished what had seemed so impossible. And I think that's how I feel about our 29-year story. I look back and it seems so impossible, yet here we are tonight speaking with you, and I'm very, very grateful for it. And thank you so much, and we'll hang around if anybody has a question.
Wow, you guys are so funny. And so awesome. I was busting up the whole time. I love the realness of your presentation, that there is good, that there is bad, and there, just your experience. Oh my gosh, you two are so good at what you do. You're inspiring.
Oh, that's so sweet of you.
Oh,
Wait, we didn't write it. We just lived it.
Thank you very much.
Well, you guys know how to punch, say the punchlines of your jokes. I was laughing real hard. So we're going to turn the time over to Q&A. If you're unfamiliar with the Zoom platform, near the bottom of your screen, whether you're on a mobile or desktop, should be a question and answer. Little icon should say Q&A. Feel free to click that and type in your question there for the bonds. I think we have some coming in. So Lindley is going to be moderating for us today. So Lindley, take it away.
All right, so we have one question from Nicola. They said, such an inspiring story. It seems like it is the allo transplant that cured you. I have heard similar stories with others. Why aren't allo transplants done more for myeloma? So is that what you had?
Let me respond, Nicholas. The story is long and involved, and it did sort of relate to one of my allo transplants. I've actually had two. One was from my matching sister, and that was done to me when my myeloma level was way too high to really have a chance of working.
Yeah.
So it actually by itself did not work for the myeloma, but it bought me 100 days of being quarantined at home. And in that time, I was able to figure out an opening to a clinical trial for what turned out to be Velcade came about. So without that allo transplant, without those extra 100 days,
Yeah, you might not have been around when that trial
there might not have been an
started.
opening.
So it,
But I'm glad you brought up the question of allo, because I left out the second allo transplant was for leukemia, and it worked great. But and I knew this going in, the problem with an allo transplant for a lot of us is something called graft versus host disease, which I've got, and it's most irritating in that it settled in my eyes. So there was a 2-year period when I could not drive a car. I couldn't see well enough to drive a car, and worse than that, everybody thought I was mad at him because I was squinting.
it's true. People were avoiding him. It was great.
Yeah. And
Like, how does she live with him?
And it was really a lot more irritating than I thought, until again medical science came through, and through a circuitous route, I found a place that does a specialized form of scleral lenses, which I wear every day to remove the stinging in my eyes and return my sight. And if anybody runs across somebody with ocular graft versus host and is having all kinds of trouble, please
There is a solution.
please give them my email, and you can, the Myeloma Crowd and Health 3 and Audrey have my permission to give out that email.
Yeah.
Or you go on the internet and search my name and myeloma, and you get a lot of the story. But I'll try to save you the time of trying to locate them. It really helped. I also left out the was it worth it, which, a lot of these side effects do make it more difficult to live with, but I'm alive. Yeah, it was worth it. 50 years of marriage, seeing both our sons get married, seeing 3 grandchildren arrive. You're darn right, it was worth it.
That's awesome.
So Nicholas, thank you for the question.
Nicola.
We have 2 more questions. Adolfo said, can you talk about the finances of everything, insurance, etc.?
Oh, yes.
Go ahead.
I'll field that one. We were very fortunate that Jim had a good healthcare plan through his firm. But back in 1993, when it came time for the transplants then were still pretty controversial. They were controversial and still considered experimental. Our insurance company turned us down 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
And this had been our goal when we started to see that the chemotherapy Jim was on was finally, it was like the 3rd one, I think you were on. The 3rd regimen was finally pushing that myeloma down. We realized, hey, we're in a position where we could probably get this transplant done, an autologous transplant. And the doctor said, okay, let's go for it. So the insurance company said no. The doctor wrote another letter with more evidence on why Jim was the ideal patient. And they said no. And I was even in the medical school library, once again, looking up case studies for the doctor. I was helping the doctor document this for the insurance company. They said no again. And fortunately for us, I've told Jim's firm about it, and they said, well, we have another insurance carrier we deal with. They said, we'll talk to them, and they asked them about it, and they said yes at first blush. So we learned early on to keep pushing back. And I do know that this particular insurance company, I actually ended up talking to somebody. I also sent them faxes like crazy of case studies, because I wanted them to know that I knew that there were people that were taking them to court and getting the okay on transplants. And I wanted them to know I knew that. So I was faxing them all these case studies, and finally talked to somebody there, and they would out and out lie to me. So, you know, it was nasty, and but we kept the wheels turning. We told the hospital, we're going to keep going, and whatever we had to do to get this moving, because we didn't slow anything down. I didn't even tell Jim half of this was going on. I just dealt with it. But I learned early on, push back, because oftentimes it is just the easy answer, and a lot of people do go away. And the other thing is, there is help out there. There's a lot of myeloma organizations that can help. The American Cancer Society can help give you references and resources on where to go and who to talk to solve these problems, but push back.
Let me just add that that's part of the luck that we've got. I mean, I worked for a large CPA firm, Ernst & Young, for 39 years. I worked hard for them, and they treated me really well. But through hard work and getting a good job, which, I thank my parents for putting me in that position. We have great insurance, but I mean, I understand that not everybody does, and it really is a struggle, and my heart goes out for them. And I appreciate Kathleen's comments.
So do I. I just wanted to also add to that. One, I love that part of your story, Kathleen and Jim, is self-advocacy, that you don't give up. You have to be your own best advocate. It's huge. It's how you survive, really, in this myeloma world. And I love the respect that the doctors gave back to you as well when you did that self-advocacy. I think sometimes we're afraid to do that pushback because, oh, it's disrespecting the doctor. But, and sometimes you do have those doctors that walk out like that one did to you. Yeah. But most of the time, I feel like they will respect your self-advocacy, and they really want they have your best interest in mind. And then another thing is we have a myeloma financial coach as part of our myeloma coach program in the myeloma crowd. And I have her contact information, and as part of the follow-up email that I'll send to all registrants, I'll make sure to include her information as well, so that you can connect with her through that myeloma coach program. Because like Jim said, some of us are very fortunate with great insurance and some of us are not. And so we want to provide care, especially with outrageous drug copays that we have today. Yeah, we want to be there to help you. So
yeah,
and there are resources for help.
Yeah, Audrey, I'm glad you made those comments. I think this was implied in what we said, but we do not try to be the boss in that when we advocate for ourselves. We may come across that way, but we really don't. What we try to be is an equal partner.
Yeah,
because, and I do that, not to be a nice guy, but because I think that's my best shot at getting the best treatment, because they know more about their molecules and their science than I'll ever know. But I know more about my case than they will ever know. And so I think a partnering of those two things is a great reason for us to speak up. And we've had a couple doctors along the way that didn't want to play that way, and but the vast majority are fine with that. They're fine with that.
Great. Lindley, you can take it again. Sorry.
Yes, we have more. We have a lot more. So Nicola asked again another question saying, are you on any treatment now currently?
Good question, Nicola.
Great question, Nicola. No, I'm not.
Okay. Sally says, what an inspiring talk. Makes me want want to finally program her new Apple Watch. Seeing a bit of exercise. She also asked, can you tell us what your cytogenic mutations are?
Oh, good Lord.
No, I
We
can't.
have long lost track of that,
I don't-
honestly.
I don't know. At one point they checked them, but I don't recall.
That had to be, it was so many years ago. I don't even think they knew what it meant, honestly. Yeah, and you know what? He's been rebuilt so many times. We just don't even worry about it.
Okay. Another user asked, do you feel your diet played a role in your success? What things do you feel made the biggest difference in your diet?
Okay, no, I don't think my diet has made the biggest difference or even a huge difference. Kathleen, I lost a lot of weight after during this experience. I'm still down, but I'm shorter too. So, but I just try to eat healthy foods. In other words, I try not to eat a bunch of snacks, and I try to not eat too much of this or too much of that. But I try to eat a solid, good old what we think of as an American diet, and
Nothing crazy. We've got lots of suggestions for all these crazy diets. People are always sending us books and, talk to somebody about coffee enemas. I mean, just stuff that's crazy.
Right.
No, this is what's out there.
I know,
But we did not engage in any of that. But I will say there are things you can do because, at times you need extra protein. Well, in today's world, there's lots of extra protein drinks, but there's also a lot of sugar in those. So I think you're better off making your own if you can. There's very easy recipes you can look up. You want extra protein. I would mix in powdered milk into a lot of things because that would provide extra protein, and powdered egg whites. That would provide extra. You could sneak it into things. And I used to make custards for Jim and puddings, and I would sneak in the extra protein. I basically fattened him up before every transplant. He'd go in looking real chubby and come out real skinny. But there's not much to him now, so I'll have to do that again if anything comes up. But there are things you can do but it was basically just normal food.
Yeah.
Basically, whatever he could consume and adding proteins to whatever to help.
Well, Kathleen says that, but my point of view is a little different. I only have so much capacity, so if I try to load up with extra this, extra that, I fill up faster.
Right.
And so
that's why I sneak stuff.
So
in.
it's just a question of how much I can hold. I try to just be normal and diet's not a big thing.
Because sometimes just several smaller meals a day. When you're going through a real medical issue, smaller meals several times a day. It's kind of snacking through the day.
I think the staying fit and the exercise theme of this session today is really probably the biggest thing, and that is, and to the extent your diet relates to that, then I think that's important because, like when I'm training to ride 300 miles in 4 days, which I stopped doing a few years ago. I can't do it anymore. But you do have to focus on what to eat so you're in good shape to do that. So you have to keep this level up and that level up. And in the intro slides or whatever video before we talk, Jenny mentioned that getting to know what numbers are important. I think for us that was individual, and we learned after a while that certain numbers were very important to us, and then as things changed over the years, other numbers became important. Well, like sugar, like glucose became important, like sodium became important when they got out of whack. So that's really why we think it is tailored to the individual, even though it's very helpful to have the Health Tree platform and to talk to others. I think each of us has got our own differences.
Great.
I like that. Our bodies metabolize things differently, and you got to fuel your body for what you need your body to do.
Yeah. Yeah,
So we do have a couple more questions. B. Sorensen said, "You are an inspiration. I exercise daily and feel that this is benefiting my condition. I feel that there should be more trials and study and benefits on exercise on myeloma. How do you feel about this?" Before
Oh,
you answer, I will say that I do know that we are trying to work on getting some studies with some doctors on the benefits of exercise and their treatment. So I know of some, but go ahead.
I'll give you my doctor's name offline if you shoot me an email, but my transplant doctor for half a number 3 and all of number 4 transplant, he told me point blank, he said, "Jim, you got through this last one, the 75-day one, because you made yourself get out of bed when you didn't want to." And he adamantly agrees with you that this is really crucial.
Well, he actually did say, he said, if we could get every patient on this transplant floor to get up and move like Jim did, he said they would all do better. And he said he knew that Jim was getting up even when he didn't feel like it, he would make himself walk. And in fact, they issued pedometers or something, or Fitbits to everybody. They tried, I don't know the outcome of it, but they had their patients all wearing something.
Yeah, he's a believer.
So he thinks that the more they're on their feet, the better. And it sends a good message to your body. It's like, hey, get with the program here. You know?
Yeah.
That's so funny because, go ahead.
So the one question, of confusion over what really saved me, the allo or the experimental drug. Look, we've told this story hundreds of times, and it's confusing and it's hard to follow. And so,
even for us.
yeah. And this might sound weird, but I'm going to say it anyhow. Shortly, I've written a book. It's going to be published, and it goes through a ton more of the detail than I've given tonight, but it hopefully clarifies a little bit what the hell we're talking about, because it's kind of confusing.
Well, thank you for that. I think we're actually going to have to finish. We will send, there are lots of thank yous out there, Jim and Kathleen, and there's a couple experiences that I'll even just share with you personally that they've talked about in the chat. I'll just send them your way, and if you want to reply to them, great. And if not, at least you'll have that. But thank you guys for sharing this time with us. Thank you, Lindley, for moderating that Q&A. Just wanted to say super quickly, I had an emergency C-section last February with my son after 3 days of grueling labor, and the doctor said to me, "Move as much as you can." And I was like ready to choke him. I was like, don't. But it was so, and luckily my mom was there. And so she said, remember, get up, remember, get up, remember. And so we would walk down the hallway of the hospital. And wow, I was out of there in 2 days, and
there you go.
Function a lot better. And my mom had me walking every day at home, and just a testament to what you said. I just want to echo what you said. And, it's amazing that our bodies, when we take care of them, when we move them the best we can. And I wasn't running a mile. You weren't running a mile day one,
Right.
We were, I loved what you said. If you can sit, then stand. If you can stand, then walk. If you can walk a little faster, because we got to do it within pace. So thank you everyone, seriously, for your participation. This is so exciting to just join together as a community to have this experience. I just want to share a couple more slides with you guys, and then we can be done for tonight. If you have any questions, I know Jim, you've given us permission to share this in email. It's jimbond48, jim.bond48@gmail.com. You can reach out to him. And like he said, he has a book coming, which is very exciting. We'll let you guys know about that. We're super excited for you, Jim and Kathleen, about that experience and opportunity. You may be interested in upcoming events that we have. So Tuesday, March 9th at 6:30 Pacific time is our Southern California Myeloma Support Group kickoff. We're inviting SoCal regions, Las Vegas regions. If you're in that area, come join us for that kickoff. It's going to be super exciting virtually. Thursday, March 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern is our Myeloma Caregivers event. We're going to be talking about conflict management for the cancer caregiver. We have a marriage and family therapist coming to speak to us. you know, with different drug side effects and the stress that's going on, you're not alone. If there is a lot of conflict, or even if there's some minor, you know, tiffs that you guys are having that you want to learn how to communicate better, make sure to come to our event. That's March 11th. Wednesday, March 17th at 1 p.m. is our Connect with the Myeloma Crowd chapter. This chapter just allows you to get to know more of the health tree programs, the Myeloma Crowd programs. So we're going to be talking about discovering patient solutions with Health Tree Cure Hub. This is an amazing feature that just came out. It lists all of the common side effects that people have, and then the real-time solutions that people are doing to combat those side effects. So it's an amazing tool. You'll want to learn more about it. You can get early access to it by coming to this webinar on March 17th. And then Thursday, March 18th at 11 a.m. is our newly diagnosed myeloma patients chapter. We're going to have Barb Hansen, who's a journey partner. That's a different program that people with myeloma participate in. She's going to be sharing her stem cell transplant experience. So if you have one scheduled, or you're even looking into it, make sure to come to that event as well. The link to register for all of those events is at the bottom of this slide. I will also send this link out along with the other things that we've discussed today in that follow-up email. Our next Fitness for Myeloma chapter meeting will be April 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're hoping that we can get somebody on to talk about physical therapy in multiple myeloma, maybe even do a mini exercise class, but we promise to keep you updated as we organize that. I want to remind you to sign up for our Muscles for Myeloma challenge if you haven't. This link will be sent out in our email as well. It's the link to download the app called Move Spring. And our challenge is to have 20 minutes of exercise a day. Now, exercise can be gardening, exercise can be walking, exercise can be running your 5K. Whatever you do, whatever you feel comfortable with, participate with us in this challenge to celebrate March, which is, if you don't know, Myeloma Awareness Month. Another special thanks to our community event sponsors, Bristol Myers Squibb, Amgen Oncology, Karyopharm Therapeutics, AbbVie, Adaptive Biotechnologies, Genentech, Oncopeptides, and Takeda Oncology. And thank you again for sharing this time with us and growing our myeloma community together. We hope you have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.